Discover how you can green your life by building a knowledge base of current sustainable and eco-savvy trends. This series will delve into hot topics, current standards and practices, ways to design better spaces, and specify materials that benefit not only us as consumers, but the world as a whole. Members of CaraGreen, as sustainable materials distributors, and other industry leaders weigh in throughout the series. This is Build Green, Live Green. Hi, this is Jessica with Build Green, Live Green, and today I am here with Zack Wiegand, who is a lighting designer with Pritchard Peck in San Francisco. Welcome to the podcast, Zachary.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Can I call you Zach?
Yeah, of course.
All right. So we've covered several topics on Build Green, Live Green. We've covered biophilic design, LEED building, which is a building standard, and some of the other building standards like WELL and Fitwell. And one thing that's pervasive in all of those is lighting. And so, we can talk about building materials and recycled content and documentation and circularity and all of these things specific to building materials. But something that's very, very important is lighting, and it shows up in energy and it shows up in atmosphere. So, can you tell us a little bit about lighting and kind of the impacts it has, not just on the building, but on the building occupants as well, and why it's showing up in these standards?
Yeah, of course. I think for a long time, lighting sort of as an industry has had a very sort of engineering focused approach where it's a lot about, energy consumption, and a lot of the priorities that lighting has sort of fit into a lot of the building standards have been very technical. And I think it's only recently, and especially with the advancement of LED technology, that we're starting to have a more holistic understanding about how lighting really affects you psychologically, emotionally. But considering how much time we spend in the workplace, I think there's a lot more understanding about how our environment affects us and affects things like productivity and focus. And lighting is a really important factor to that, because I think that there's a certain awareness, people aren't necessarily aware of the things that affect them. And lighting, I think, is one of those really important things where if you're not aware of lighting in particular in things like color temperature and direction and intensity, it can become a little bit obscure and very technical. But now that we're sort of factoring these into these building standards, there's more of an awareness of the direct impact in how it really affects people. And even moving away from the sort of office and work environment, there's more and more products that are coming to the market for home use that have sort of the same sort of biophilic opportunities, things like changing the color temperature to sort of match with circadian rhythms and the changing of light qualities throughout the day. So I think holistically, there's more focus about how important lighting is to our wellness and how we can incorporate changes in how we approach lighting design sort of in all environments, in offices, in hospitality, residentially. So I think there's a lot of change happening right now, and it's really exciting to see that these standards are incorporating lighting as sort of a big factor in how they approach building standards.
I thought it was interesting when you brought up the residential aspect of it, because I can't recall exactly where I was, but we went somewhere to get a light. And I think I was with my stepmother in Minnesota. And we went to get a light. She just was trying to replace a light. And we walked into the store and we had no idea what shade, what hue, what temperature. It used to just be wattage. And she was just sitting there flustered saying she needed a 60-watt bulb, but there were just all these different options now. So it's very clear just by that there's, this whole psychology and physiology, to lighting now. And it's really interesting. And even here in North Carolina, the Cree headquarters, which was kind of one of these LED pioneers, several years ago, really kind of kicked off that focus on the energy consumption. This is going to be a cheaper energy bill, but as you're saying, the effects of all these different colors that we ran into at the hardware store, they change your behavior, whether you know it or not. So I find it interesting, especially having lived out in Silicon Valley where you are. Offices were designed to be cool. There was a keg and a ping pong table, and that was how you got people into these office spaces. And you see that shifting now. And the occupants, the employees, future employees are becoming more savvy to these things that are not so direct, not a ping pong table, not a keg, but controllable lighting, day lighting. Am I near a window? All of that stuff. So, can you talk about lighting in the context of, as a lighting designer, you're not just this bulb goes here, let's put a bulb over here. You're not laying out electrical. You're actually looking at the whole building and how where lighting is and needed and how it's controlled throughout the whole building, correct?
Right. Yeah, so there are many sort of layers when we're thinking about creating a lighting layout or approaching a new project. There are a lot of considerations because we're sort of reacting to the architecture. So you have an architectural plan, you're looking at an office layout, and we're really responding to the tasks that are sort of focused in each location and responding to the architecture. Are there windows? Where are you going to get natural light? Where do we need to supplement with electrical light? Where are your task surfaces? Where do you need concentrations of light? So you're looking sort of the larger picture, whole picture, where your natural light sources are, where you need to supplement with electrical light. And then you're really looking at the amount of light that you need to serve the functions of the jobs at hand. So, we're looking where are your task surfaces? Where do you need the highest concentrations of light? Where are the sort of lounging and relaxation spaces? Because the quantity or sort of the intensity of light or the quality of light may be different if you're in a space for, that's centered about, relaxation or, group meetings or lunch, as opposed to a task specific area, because our approach would change. If you are lighting a lounge space or something that's supposed to be more casual or that's supposed to sort of invoke a more collaborative experience, the quality of light would be different. It would be softer. It may be warmer to sort of engage sort of a more relaxed environment. Whereas your tasks or, your desk or your task surfaces require a different type of light. You need higher foot candle levels. Anything that requires more detailed work or something where you're doing a lot more detailed work, you're going to need higher light levels. You may want a more neutral color temperature, especially if you're dealing any fields where you're dealing with design or colors or material. You might need a more neutral color temperature so you could have really accurate color rendering. Whereas if you're in sort of a lounge or an entertainment space, that may be less of a priority, and maybe you have opportunities to incorporate color. So it really is dependent on the tasks at hand and what you need the light to do for you.
So, thinking about that, I sort of, trying to imagine what the light is going to do. You have so many variables, right? You have time of day, you have buildings around you. Do you use any software, like rendering software, to do this? I'm assuming you do, but I'm just curious what kind of software you guys use to kind of model this so that you can come up with these lighting plans.
Yeah. On the commercial side of lighting design, calculations and renderings become really important. And they're a really important communication tool, not only working with architects, but also with clients, because lighting is such sort of an intangible, obscure medium that communicating lighting ideas can be really difficult without sort of a visual representation. So we use lighting software like AGI is a popular one that we use, and there are many others that do similar tasks. But what's nice about them is they can bring in 3D models that are generated by an architect or interior designer.
Like
And
a
then
big
we can,
model?
yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay.
And then we can render the lighting effects based off of the calculation software. So every LED light source or LED light source that's manufactured has what's called an IES file, which is basically a calculation file. So there's a standard method of calculating the amount of light that a light fixture produces.
Yeah.
And so this IES file we bring into the model, and it basically generates a digital version of what that light fixture does in a space. We populate the model with light fixtures that we want to specify on a job, and it can output a 3D model. So we have a very clear understanding and expectation of what the lights are going to do in that space.
So we talked a lot about BIM models on our side as well, on the material side, because we see this shift from kind of designers picking out materials and pushing them to the architects for BIM. And
Mhm.
we really think that architects are going to start designing and then pushing the specifications back down. So it's a really kind of interesting concept, but it makes me wonder, when you're simulating inside of an architectural drawing to get these lighting plans, are there ever times where your lighting plan can push back and get the architect to change the drawing to allow lighting in a different space or a different kind of glazing or something?
Yeah, this happens all the time. It's a really fun collaboration to work as a lighting designer with architects because we really try and push and challenge each other to try and get the best project or the best result that we can. And what's fun is, sort of lighting in particular requires a lot of integration with architecture. So I feel like lighting designers, more than many other subs, have the ability to engage with architects in a way where we can sort of modify or integrate lighting into the architecture in
Yeah.
ways that are can be really discreet but can be really powerful to enhance the architecture. We're never trying to change the architecture. We're never trying to push the architect in a direction they don't want to go. We're always trying to engage with architecture to integrate lighting as much as possible so that it disappears as much as possible. So the idea that the lighting just sort of becomes so integrated to the architecture that if you can't tell where it's coming from, we've done a good job.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, you make me think about sort of when I got into my background is in electrical engineering, and I ended up in building materials, and I all of a sudden found myself, selling countertop materials, and every time I go into a bar, I'm touching the bar, see what it's made out of, how thick is it, does it have a substrate? But I'm constantly like observing things through the lens of my current career. Do you find you do the same thing when you go into spaces? You're like, oh, they used cool lighting here, they should have used warm. Do you kind of feel like you observe lighting in a different way now that you're in, knee deep in it?
Oh yeah, every chance I get, every time I go into a new space, whether it's a commercial space or hospitality, a bar or restaurant, or if I go into somebody's home, my head immediately goes up as I walk in because it I'm always curious. I'm always curious to see how other people have approached their lighting design, how well integrated the lighting is to the architecture. I'm always looking for interesting details,
Uh-huh.
integrated architectural lighting details. Because again, if I go into a space and I feel like the lighting is layered and considered and discrete, where I can't tell where the light is coming from, I just experience what it feels like,
Yeah.
then that's a very successful project. So I'm always looking to see how other people have done it in interesting ways. I'm always looking for consistency, especially residentially. Do people's color temperatures match? Does the light bulbs in the kitchen match the light bulbs in the living room?
Yeah.
Because there are so many variables, especially with new technology. If you're not educated or if you're not specialized in new LED technology and sort of the more technical sides of it, it can be very overwhelming. And so, for a lot of homeowners or people who don't have a lot of experience, it can be difficult to go to Home Depot and pick the right lamp or pick the right
Yeah.
color temperature um, because it's still sort of a very niche industry and it can be very confusing. So I am every time I walk into the space, there's a whole sort of bullet point list of things that I look at. I look up at the ceiling. I look at, you know, are there interesting shelf details or, what are their decorative fixtures look like? So yeah, it's sort of a blessing and a curse of being a lighting designer because you can become so fixated on
Yes.
analyzing the space around you. But yeah, every place I go, my head immediately goes up.
Well, it's funny because I'm glad you're in San Francisco, because if you walked into my house, you would see mismatched bulbs. And I get in there and I turn it in. And I'm like, I didn't know, like, it was the right size. I got the right size. I thought I was winning. But so for people like me that have mismatched bulbs and want to make sure they have kind of the right lighting, what are some kind of like quick tips as we wrap it up here that you would give homeowners? Try to, what sort of tones and what should they be looking for when they're buying light bulbs for their home?
Mhm. So typically on every light bulb packaging, there's something on the back that's called lighting facts. And it's like a little, it almost looks like a nutrition facts label that you would
Uh-huh.
find on the back of a cereal box, but it's on the back of the light bulb box. And that has a lot of the technical information about that lamp. And what's really important for me are two considerations. One is the color temperature of the lamp,
Mhm.
which is on a scale called kelvins.
Uh-huh.
And there's a lot of sort of technical background to what that scale is. But the two things that you're looking for are the color temperature. And typically for residential use, what I always recommend is either 3000 Kelvin or 2700 Kelvin.
Okay.
Those are sort of the two standards that we use for residential lighting.
Okay.
And they're both considered warm white.
Okay.
Basically, when you're talking about lighting, you're talking about a scale of colors on a white spectrum, where cool is on the high end of the Kelvin scale. So, for example, daylight would be considered something around 10,000 to 6,000 Kelvin. And then, sort of the lowest, the opposite end of the spectrum would be the warm end of the spectrum, what we would sort of more associate with like candlelight or old incandescent lamps.
Okay.
And 27K is on the warmer end of that spectrum.
Okay.
So, and it really comes down to personal preference a lot too. I mean, if you're older or if you like higher intensity light, if you like brightness or you sort of like a more neutral look, 3000 Kelvin is a really great option, especially if you have, a lot of white walls and a lot of more neutral tones. 3000K is great and it's really flexible between day and night. On the other hand, 2700K is a little bit more warm and cozy.
Hmm.
For me, I prefer 27K just because I like the transition into night better. It
Okay.
feels warmer, it feels a little bit more cozy. When I dim lights, I like the color of 2700K more in its dim setting because it has a closer association to candlelight or dimmed incandescent light. But those would be the two color temperatures that I would always recommend double checking. Anything cooler than that can feel uncomfortable in a home.
Okay.
So
Okay.
anything like 4,000 Kelvin, 5,000 Kelvin is getting very cool, especially at night, can make it feel very uncomfortable. So those are the two things that I would check. And then the other thing on the lighting facts list that's important is your CRI or your
Yeah.
color rendering index. And this is about how closely the light source renders colors properly. So if you have a very cheap, inexpensive LED bulb,
Uh-huh.
there's a chance that the CRI is low because it's a less expensive LED chip. And the sort of closest association to people who might not be totally familiar with LEDs is a low color rendering index to me is similar to like fluorescent light, where even if you have a warm fluorescent light, it doesn't render colors properly. So things can feel a bit muddy or they can
Hmm.
feel a bit gray or they don't feel quite as vibrant as they should.
Hmm.
So typically you see that with CRIs that are less than 80. So if you
Okay.
see CRI that's, 70, 80, I would think twice about making that purchase. Anything that's
Okay.
higher than 80, so like 85, 90, those are really great options. And those have a really, they render colors better and more true to their more natural color. So they make the experience of being in rooms more comfortable because there's not sort of this muddying or shift in the way that colors are rendered under those lights. So those would be the two pieces of information that I would check that lighting facts on the back of your light bulb before purchasing.
All right. So, any homeowners that are listening and thinking about getting new lighting, Kelvin's 2700 or 3000 and a CRI greater than 80. And
Hmm.
the CRI one rings true because we have a fluorescent bulb in our office and we do a lot of custom colors. And I distinctly remember walking, just trying to see if two colors matched. And I walked out of the main area and they looked great. And I walked under this fluorescent light and I was shocked because all of a sudden they looked really different than they just had. So yeah, I've kind of experienced that firsthand, but I never really attributed it to or knew that it was the CRI. So thanks for that. All right. Well, this has been great. I mean, I think there's a lot here on the commercial side, which is how I was approaching this. But as you started talking, I realized that this is very kind of personal as well. And certainly it's personal to you in that, you're kind of looking around at lighting all the time, the way that I'm looking at building materials. So
Mhm.
thanks so much for coming on and giving us all your insight into lighting.
Yeah, it was great. Thanks for having me.
This is Jessica with Build Green, Live Green.